This program is brought to you by the partners of A Rood Awakening International. Help others find truth. Support A Rood Awakening International today.
More often than not, when you lose something, it's not really lost. It's just misplaced. In other words, whatever you're looking for still exists. You're just looking for it in the wrong place. Whether it's a set of keys or the very existence of the Israelites and the history of the Exodus. Looking in the right place is all that matters. Tonight, we're going to meet the man who wrote the movie script about finding the Israelites when all other historians were simply looking in the wrong place. Tim Mahoney joins us tonight because it's the end of the sixth day, the sun is set, and this is Shabbat Night Live. Well, Shabbat Shalom, Torah fans. Welcome to Shabbat Night Live with Michael Rood. Hey, Passover 2019, just 3 weeks away now, and you do not want to miss a minute of it. And you don't have to. You can watch it online at PassoverCharlotte.com. Our main event is some exciting new information from Nehemia Gordon about the connection between the split rock at Rephidim, the rock that Moses struck and water gushed out, and the pool of Siloam in Jerusalem, where Yeshua told the blind man to wash after he put mud on his eyes. Very interesting stuff there. So get on it, get all the details to watch it online at PassoverCharlotte.com. Also tonight, we have a special guest who is going to share with us some equally fascinating information that dates back to the time of the Israelites. But first, let's see where we are on the astronomically and agriculturally corrected biblical Hebrew calendar. There on your screen tonight, we can see that it's the fourth Shabbat in the month of Adar, and we are getting very, very close to determining whether or not the Hebrew calendar will need a 13th month. The ripening of the barley crop in Israel is what that's all about. So stay locked on to aroodawakening.tv for more information about that. Now, one of the most fascinating films I have ever seen, and one that had me sharing the information on it with everyone, was Patterns of Evidence, The Exodus. This documentary forever silenced for me the critics who said that there was no evidence for the Israelites ever being in Egypt, or evidence for the Exodus for that matter. Tonight we have that filmmaker joining us tonight. Please welcome Tim Mahoney.
Oh.
Tim, welcome to Shabbat Night Live.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
And I'm honest about that. I mean, the Exodus Patterns of Evidence was just amazing to me. And I started sharing with everybody. Did you know that the timeline was off by 200 years and now they can find everything? So, you know, how did that all start for you? What made you even want to make this documentary?
Well, I thought I was making a film that was going to be about an hour long, and it was going to take a year. And so, but obviously, I know a lot of people probably understand this. There's something that is drawing you can to the story of the Exodus, and it's hard to explain, but it has drawn me, just as it has drawn many others, to search for evidence of it. And so, back in 2001, when I heard about people searching for chariot wheels and finding possibly Mount Sinai in Arabia and a lot of this information, I was absolutely fascinated by that, and that began then my own personal interest as a filmmaker to jump into it. And in 2002, we went into Egypt and started searching for everything from the Israelites in the land of Goshen all the way through to the route of the Exodus. And we went to the traditional sites. We also went to the non-traditional sites, the new sites such as Nuiba, the crossing there. So I was just trying to document the whole story and try to see what I could find.
Now, in this process, I know that we've spoken previously about meetings you've had where the Holy Spirit just sort of came down and everyone in the room was like, yep, you're on the right track. That kind of thing is happening, where God's in this with you. Yeah,
well, I think that the first film took 12 years to make, and it was very lonely at times. So I wasn't sure where we were at different times. So but I can tell you that there was very specific moments where I felt that God was directing the next step, and some of those are very there's things that have happened in my own life, and there's some of them I can share and some of them I don't share, but they're basically really powerful. There'll be a time maybe when I can share them, but where you just knew the next thing you were supposed to do. And in the midst of this investigation, I was very focused in the first years on Egypt. And then eventually, as you mentioned, there was a meeting that we had that then, after that meeting, it was a powerful experience. We knew that this wasn't just about Egypt, this was also about Israel. And that's when I realized that we weren't done making this film, even though I had finished. People might not realize this, but I had made 2 films prior, and I didn't think that they were right. So I had to, and they were finished films. And when I look back on them, they were prototypes, but they weren't the right film. And I didn't have the right approach to it. Eventually, it was like 2005 or so, 2006, in that time period, we went to Israel. And I knew I was supposed to be there, and the producer in Israel asked me, well, who do you want to talk to? And I said, I want to talk to the leaders of your nation.
And I bet he said, yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, it was actually a woman producer, Sharon, and she said, okay. I said, I want to talk to Benjamin Netanyahu. I want to talk to Shimon Peres. I want to talk to the ambassadors. I want to talk to the top religious people. And you know what? She got those interviews.
Amazing. That's just unreal to me. So now, Patterns of Evidence, if no one has seen it, you need to go see this movie. You need to, I'm assuming it's all over the place. People can buy the DVD and such.
Right, yeah. And I think you sell the DVD. So.
Yeah, we are selling a DVD, yeah. And what's your website where they can get it, if they want to get directly from you?
Patternsofevidence.com.
Okay, all right. So we can get it there. Now, the next movie, you had planned on doing the Red Sea crossing. And then you came upon a snag that stopped you from doing that and put you in a different direction. What happened there?
Yeah, exactly. So for the last 18 years, I was driving towards the first film. But I started to see that there were problems. In fact, one scholar said to me, well, why would you even search for the route of the Exodus when we know the Israelites weren't in Egypt in the first place? There's no evidence for that. And in fact, in the first film, I talk about you never know where a crisis of faith will lead you. And when I came back from Egypt the first time, I had a crisis of faith because I wanted to be intellectually honest, but when I went to the locations where they said the Israelites were, they said there wasn't any evidence for it. And that began this 12-year investigation to search for this. Now, the next part of this is the route of the Exodus. So we've covered the fact that there's evidence there's a pattern of evidence that matches the Israelites were there and the conquest in the Promised Land. But it's at a different time period than when people would think. So the next film was the next question deals with what we call the Moses controversy, because scholars are going to tell us that we don't think that Moses possibly even existed, and we know for sure that he didn't write the first books of the Bible. They were probably written maybe 1,000 years, up to 1,000 years later.
Supposedly. And that's where all this all leads. Okay, well, we're going to leave it there, and we're going to talk more next week. So thank you, Tim. Coming up, why you should test everything in your Bible, not because it's not trustworthy, but because translation errors happen. Michael Rood and Nehemia Gordon are going to give you a very good example of that tonight and show you what to do about it. But first, we have a very special movie trailer from Tim to show you. The movie is coming to theaters across the country March 14, 16, and 19. Mark your calendars. It's Patterns of Evidence, The Moses Controversy by Tim Mahoney. Here's a sneak peek. Take a look.
Moses had written down all the instructions from God, as well as the history of his people, beginning with the creation of the world.
Did Moses write the Torah? Frankly, I don't think so.
I don't think any mainstream scholars would any longer hold that view.
If you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my words? So there it looks like you have a definitive statement from Jesus that Moses produced the Torah, and he's staking an awful lot on that reality.
He would have written in Egyptian, probably, if he had written, not Hebrew.
Hebrew is a kind of dialect that developed much later.
Though writing was possible, most people were illiterate. And so who would have written it and for whom? There is no reading public.
The question of Moses' ability to write the first books of the Bible led me to the ancient lands of the Middle East, searching for patterns of evidence that match the biblical events.
The Lord said to Moses, write this in a book.
This is very writing script that's the basis of the world's oldest alphabet.
But when you read it, it doesn't actually become Egyptian. It's something quite different.
We believe there are thousands of more documents that possibly could be found.
So that connects these two inscriptions in time.
To the time of Joseph.
Yes.
I wish that it were true.
It's not science.
Whether it is or not is a question of belief.
So the question is the Bible a literal story of God acting in history?
The last night that Yeshua was with his disciples, the Last Supper before the Passover was sacrificed, he took bread and he took wine. He said before that Abraham saw his day and rejoiced. But what does that mean? He saw his day and rejoiced. Well, it was the Melchizedek, the king of righteousness, that brought forth bread and wine to Abraham. He blessed the Most High with the blessing that Abraham taught Yitzhak, Yitzhak taught Yaakov, and is still spoken today. Whenever bread and wine is served at a Jewish table, whenever it is Sabbath, especially around the world, the bread and the wine are brought forth with this blessing. Baruch atah Yehovah, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pari hagafen. Blessed are you, Yehovah, our Elohim, King of the universe, the creator of the fruit of the vine. And Yeshua then said, blessed are you, Yehovah, our Elohim, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. He said, this represents my body, which will be broken for you. This represents my shed blood that pays the sin penalty because of the broken covenant. As often as we do this, we do this in remembrance of him. So break the bread, share the wine, and we do this in remembrance of him until he comes. Two weeks ago on Shabbat Night Live, we began an adventure with Nehemia Gordon. I asked Nehemia to come to Charlotte because I wanted to spend time with him, to catch up. It had been a year since we were together, and just the first evening together, for about 5 hours, he began laying things out that I said, okay, I didn't bring you in here to do any filming, but I can't let you go. We've got to get this on the air, and in preparation for Passover, in which Nehemia Gordon is going to be with us. So, ladies and gentlemen, Nehemia Gordon. Nehemia.
Hello, Michael. It's great to be here.
Well, we left off last week. We were talking about Martin Luther, about his book, The Lies of the Jews.
Well, he had the book, The Jews and Their Lies, and actually we quoted last week from the book, which was called Concerning Shem HaMeforash, which is concerning the Tetragrammaton, and he says things that are just horrific about God's holy name. Michael, on his birthday in 1938, there was a pivotal event in the history of European Jewry, which was called Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht 1938 is when the Germans, the Nazis, attacked Jewish homes and businesses. They famously smashed the glass of all the Jewish stores, and hence Kristallnacht is often translated as Night of the Broken Glass. On that night, November 9th going into November 10th, Martin Luther's birthday, they ransacked Jewish synagogues and seminaries and institutions all over Europe, and they gathered manuscripts into a central repository in Prague. And they established there what has been known as the Museum of the Extinct Race, because it was Hitler's purpose to make the Jews extinct. And he wanted future generations to see this is what this evil culture, the Jews that we've wiped out from his perspective, the evil Jews, this is what their books look like and their art. And isn't it wonderful we wiped them all out? That was Hitler's plan. And because of that, there was one of the books, and actually many of the books, were spared from Kristallnacht. They were not burned and destroyed. They were brought to this museum in Prague. And one of those was actually a manuscript of the Gospel of Matthew in Hebrew, what's called Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew. I talked about that in my book, The Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus.
That's right.
And actually this specific manuscript, the Breslau manuscript we talked about in the Open Door series that we did, 18 wonderful hours of teaching. And one of the things we looked at there in the Open Door series is where the Pharisees come and they ask Yeshua, what is the most important commandment of all? And he responds, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your might and all your strength. And there's some ambiguity there when you compare the different Gospels in Greek and in English. And what I loved about this Breslau manuscript is there it says in Hebrew, V'ahavta et, and it has He, Hashem, representing Yud He Vav He, because a rabbi who copied this over the generations wouldn't put God's name, Yehovah, outside the Tanakh, essentially.
Right.
Even when they copy the Talmud, they put in He or Yud or some other representation, Yud Vav Yud, or Yud Yud. So it's V'ahavta et Yehovah Elohecha b'chol vavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol me'odecha. So he says, he's quoting Deuteronomy 6:5 verbatim, and then he says, this is the first and the greatest of the commandments, and the second is like it. And in the Hebrew, it's V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, which is from Leviticus 19. And then he says something really profound. Yeshua says something profound. V'al bet ha'ele ha'torah kula tluya v'hanevi'im. And upon these two, the entire Torah and the prophets hang. Now, when most Christians read that phrase, hang, I wonder if they really understand that there's a Hebrew idiom here, an idiom that any Jew would understand in the first century and any Jew who studied ancient Jewish sources would immediately recognize. And that idiom is this concept where hang there, what it really means is derive. And we have this example in rabbinical sources where they say all the laws of the Sabbath, meaning all the laws of the Sabbath in rabbinical law, in the oral law, hang upon, are like they're like a mountain hanging by a thread. And what they mean by that is we have 2 or 3 little verses in the Tanakh, and out of that they derive a myriad of laws. And they're actually saying this almost in a way that's in some sense ironic, right? You wouldn't know about these without the oral law, meaning the rabbis made up a bunch of laws, and then they said you wouldn't know about these laws from the Torah because they're like a mountain hanging by a thread. And what Yeshua, and here's the point, when it says hang, what it means is they derive. In other words, when Yeshua says upon these 2 commandments, the entire Torah and the prophets hang, it means the entire Torah and prophets derive. The central principle of all the Torah and the prophets is love Yehovah your God and love your neighbor as you love yourself. And a Jew hears that and it's just so plain and simple. Jews think in these terms. There's 2 types of commandments. Ben Adam lechavero, between a man and his fellow, between a human and his fellow human. Ben Adam lamakom, between a man, a human, and the Creator, the Eternal One. And so that's how Jews think about the commandments. They'll say, okay, Shabbat, that's between man and God. Don't steal, that's between man and man. And there's an element with God, right? Because God watches you, but it's something that doesn't, that hurts your fellow man. And so these are the 2 underlying principles of Jewish thought. And so when Yeshua brings these 2 verses, he just silences the Pharisees. They're just blown away by what he said. Now, they're blown away for another reason. And the other reason they're blown away, we don't know from Matthew, but we find this out when we read the verse in Mark. Because in Mark 12, 28 to 30, there's a slightly different expanded version, right? There's some words missing that we find in Mark. And in Mark, he doesn't start in Deuteronomy 6:5, love the Lord your God, love Yehovah your God. He starts in Deuteronomy 6:4. And there he quotes, Hear, O Israel. Within the Hebrew is Shema Yisrael, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad. Hear, O Israel, Yehovah is our God, Yehovah is one. And those are words that touch the heart of every Jew. I mean, they're so deeply ingrained in Jewish culture that they are literally, we are taught from the youngest age that those are the last words that you should speak on your lips before you die. And literally, there are stories you'll hear from people all the time that their grandmother, their grandfather, someone was on their deathbed and they were fading away, and they would stand with them and hold their hand and recite the Shema with them. And that is the most beautiful thing that a Jew can imagine, that as a person is passing on from this world, they proclaim, Yehovah is our God, Yehovah is one. I mean, those are just profound, really important words in the Jewish culture. And so for them to ask Yeshua, what is the most important commandment? And he starts with Shema Yisrael, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad. That would silence it would touch the heart of even the most stubborn Pharisee, deep in his soul. Through time, this verse became really even more important in Jewish culture. And I want to share something with the audience, Michael. We started talking about Kristallnacht, how the Nazis attacked the Jews. Well, we have this museum in Israel. It's not the museum of the extinct race. It's the museum of the race that's not extinct. It's called Yad Vashem. And Yad Vashem is actually a phrase that comes from Isaiah 56. It talks about those who don't have children. Yehovah will raise them up and give them a yad, which means a monument, literally a hand, and a name greater than sons and daughters. And for all those Jews who were wiped out in the Holocaust, this memorial was established in Israel to remember them, to remember their names, this Yad Vashem. A few years back, Michael, I was at Yad Vashem, and I'm going through the museum, and I see something that blew me away, and I'm sure any Jew who sees this, it was blazoned across the wall, this quote from a rabbi who was going to his death in the gas chambers. Now, let me read you the quote. The rabbi turns to the Nazis, and he says, "Do not think you will succeed in destroying the Jewish people. The Jewish people will live forever." When the rabbi finished, he cried out emphatically, "Shema Yisrael!" And all the Jews cried out with him, "Shema Yisrael." I mean, there's no Jew who hears this and his heart is not touched. The dream and aspiration of every Jew is the last words on your lips are to be Shema Yisrael. The Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And here this rabbi with his whole congregation going into the gas chambers, they were able to recite these words. And I remember being at Yad Vashem, and I saw this and I thought, how beautiful. But my second thought, Michael, was that can't possibly be true. How can that be true that this rabbi, just before he marched into the gas chambers, proclaimed Shema Yisrael with his congregation there? Even if it was true, how would we know it? And here I'm a conflicted person, Michael. I'll be the first one to admit that. On the one hand, I've had these God experiences, and those are deeply profound and important to me. On the other hand, I've been trained to look at things like a litvak and as an academic, and so, here's how I describe it to people. I wear two hats. My one hat is the hat of faith, and my other hat is the hat of skepticism, of inquiry and scholarship. And I know how to distinguish between the two hats. Mm-hmm. When I go to a Bible conference for academics, I leave my faith at the door, and I interact with everyone the way that they're all interacting, which is these are the raw, unadulterated facts that if you could be a Christian, a Catholic, a Jew, an atheist, anybody could look at the same facts and come to the same conclusion. But I also am a man of faith outside of that academic context. And I saw these words on the Yad Vashem about the rabbi saying Shema Yisrael, and I thought, there's no way that's true. And as much as I want to believe it, this has to be a folk tale, because how would we know?
Right.
Who reported this? The rabbi's dead. His congregation's dead. Did the Nazis tell us that the rabbi recited Shema Yisrael? Did they even know what he...
Not likely.
Didn't make any sense. And I became very kind of skeptical, but I decided if this is untrue, I need to expose it and ask Yad Vashem to take it down from the National Holocaust Memorial, because we want the truth to be there in this museum.
Right.
And nothing but the truth. And if it is true, I want to be able to verify that as well. And I spent years researching this, Michael. This was a little project I had on the side. Time to time, I would be digging up, reading articles about the Holocaust and the history. And I found out, Michael, there was this thing called the Sonderkommando. The Sonderkommando were these people whose job it was, they were Jews who were kept alive for a short period to collect the bodies from the gas chambers, pile them up on carts, strip them of any property they had. And I'm talking, I don't even know how I can tell your audience it was their job to pull teeth, gold teeth, and to cut hair that was then recycled and then burn the bodies. And I thought, well, okay, so maybe the Sonderkommando preserved this story, but they were all killed, or so I thought at the time. So how could we know about this incident of what happened there? And I want to back up to give you a little bit of a context of why I was so skeptical that this rabbi, because this really is your I'm going to call it the paradigmatic martyr story, right? This is your ultimate martyr story. The Jew's about to go into the gas chamber, and he calls out Shema Yisrael, and the congregation responds to Shema Yisrael, and they go to their deaths. This is the proverbial Christians being eaten by lions story, right? This is the ultimate martyr story for Jews. And so I want to read you the story of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is a famous rabbi who was put to death by the Romans around the year 135 at the end of the Bar Kokhba revolt. And it's described in the Talmud. It says, when they brought forth Rabbi Akiva for execution, it was the time for the reciting the Shema. And what it means there is it says in the Shema, and if you read the whole passage in Deuteronomy 6, it says, you will speak about them when you lie down and when you get up. And the rabbi said that means every night when you go to sleep, you are to recite the Shema. And every day when you wake up in the morning, you recite the Shema. And look, this is something I grew up doing. Every night reciting the Shema, every morning and I actually still recite the Shema every day. Right? I don't take it necessarily literally the way it was taken literally by the rabbis, but I say, okay, maybe that's not what God commanded literally, but what a beautiful thing to recite these words. Hear, O Israel, Yehovah is our God, Yehovah is one, and you shall love Yehovah your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your might, etc. So it says when Rabbi Akiva was being taken out to be executed, it was the time of the reciting of the Shema. And it says, as the Romans were combing his flesh with iron combs, right? So they literally skinned this rabbi alive. He was receiving upon himself the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. And that phrase, receiving upon himself the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, is Jewish phraseology. That's a Jewish idiom that means he was reciting the Shema, which is really interesting. We could have some New Testament discussions about that as well, maybe. But this phrase, receiving upon yourself the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, he was reciting the Shema. Rabbi Akiva's disciple said to him, even now? Like now you're being skinned alive and you're reciting the Shema? Rabbi Akiva said to them, all my days I was troubled by the verse, with all your soul, right? Because it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your might. Mm-hmm. I was troubled by the verse with all your soul, which means even if it costs you your life. I said to myself, when will I have the opportunity to fulfill this? This is a rabbi being skinned alive by the Romans, and he's thinking, there's a verse I didn't get to fulfill. Oh, now I can fulfill it. And now that I have the opportunity, should I not fulfill it? He elongated his pronunciation of echad, of one, until his soul left him. So we have this deeply rooted Jewish tradition of reciting the Shema as the last words. And here, this Rabbi Akiva, he was able to fulfill that. And there are Jews throughout history who have done this. Even in modern times, we have documented examples, right? I'm skeptical of what happened in the Holocaust, and we'll get to that. We'll find out if that really happened or not. But we have modern examples that are indisputable. There's an example of an Israeli commander who was in the war in Lebanon. And it's a moving story, because this was an Israeli commander who had a wife and children, and he was there with his soldiers, and a terrorist threw a grenade amongst his soldiers. And the commander jumped on the grenade, covered it with his stomach. And the grenade went off. And he radioed it to headquarters, telling the headquarters, I'm dying. Shema Yisrael, Yehovah, of course he said Adonai, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. As his life breath went out, and he was surrounded by witnesses, surrounded by soldiers who recounted the story that this Israeli commander said the Shema as he was dying, following the example of Rabbi Akiva, following the example of many Jewish martyrs throughout history. And so because this is so deeply embedded in Jewish culture, I had to ask the question, is this a true story? Or is this just a fable we're telling people about the Holocaust? We shouldn't be telling stories that aren't true about the Holocaust, because there's enough truth there to sustain us and understand what happened. And so I had to ask the skeptical question. So I began to investigate, Michael, And I found out there was something that scholars call the Scrolls of Auschwitz. The Scrolls of Auschwitz is a series of documents. There's, depending on how you count them, approximately 9 caches of documents that were found at Auschwitz. And there were others found in other places, but specifically at Auschwitz, there were these caches of documents and diaries and letters. And these diaries and letters were mostly written by these Jewish Sonderkommando. These were the people whose job it was to clean up the bodies. Their job it was to cut the hair and pull the teeth and put the bodies in the ovens. And there's horrific things described in these diaries that they wrote. And then I began to ask the question, is it possible the story about the rabbi reciting the Shema before he went to his death with his congregation, could that have come from these Scrolls of Auschwitz? And I made it my mission to find the answer to this question. I read every book there was in Hebrew. I read books in English. There was one book in Yiddish that I had to have translated because, I don't read Yiddish. Parts of it were translated. And I found things, Michael, I didn't expect. Things that really shocked me. And here actually, I want to show the people what some of the Scrolls of Auschwitz look like. Because Michael, you think, how could something have survived the Holocaust like this? What happened is they burned the bodies of the Jews, and there were mountains of ash, mounds and mounds of ash, and they put those ashes into pits. And then the procedure was they would take the ashes from the pits every once in a while, put them on a truck, and dump them in the river, in the Vistula River. So some of these Jews said, hey, if it's picked up in the river, it might survive in a bottle. And so one of these is like put in a canteen, in like a makeshift canteen. And it turns out it survived not because it was in the river, but because they never got around to, because the Nazis were losing the war, they never got around to putting that pile of ash in the river. And there's one account of these Polish forestry students who came to do some cleaning up at Auschwitz because it gets overrun with the forest. Right, the forest is encroaching on this historical site. And as they're pulling weeds, they find these documents, right? And these documents were found all the way from 1945 up until relatively recent times. They still continue to find some of these documents, these Scrolls of Auschwitz. I actually did a teaching on my website, nehemiaswall.com, called The Lost Scrolls of Auschwitz, because we don't have all the documents. And I think we need to remember what happened here. And in the second half, I want to share with people what were found in these lost scrolls of Auschwitz and how deeply these Jews were connected to God's holy name and sanctifying his name.
Well, history is his story in the making. And we'll be back right after this with another look into history that's going to take us right back into the scriptures and understanding for our day and time. In the book of the Revelation, Yeshua reveals to John a direct quote from Daniel chapter 12. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation even to that same time. And Yeshua also quotes that, and it is recorded in the Gospel of Matthew.
Wow, Michael. I mean, I hear that, especially coming when I read that in Daniel, and I say, and I read it in the Hebrew there in the original of Daniel, and I'm like really realizing, so what I read about in history in the Holocaust, they're in the future from what Daniel, if I understand Daniel correctly, there's going to be a time that's worse than what people experienced in the Holocaust. And I think this was why it's so important for us to understand what happened in history so that when it happens in the future, we have some perspective of what's going on. We were talking in the last segment, Michael, about this rabbi at Yad Vashem who was quoted at Yad Vashem as saying the Shema with his congregation. And I was looking for the source to that to find out, is that true? Did that really happen? And I found out there was these caches of documents called the Scrolls of Auschwitz, which were buried in the human ash after the Jews were burned. Let me read you from one of those diaries. It was written by a Sonderkommando. This was one of the Jews who was pressed into slavery. And if you want to understand what this means, there's a movie, which is one of the most difficult movies I've ever seen. It's called Son of Saul. And it was actually a Hungarian movie. And it is, I read the Scrolls of Auschwitz and then saw the movie. And I realized that movie, the script for that movie was essentially the Scrolls of Auschwitz. right? They took these scrolls and they said, what would this look like in a dramatic visual presentation? And it brings to life what you're reading. So here's what Zalman Grodowski wrote in a scroll that was hidden away in the pile of ash on September 6, 1944. He said, "Dear finder, search all the grounds. Buried in them are dozens of documents, mine and those of others, which cast light on all that has happened here." So these Jews who were being murdered, they were being pulled off trains, and there was what was called the selection. They said, these Jews go to death, these Jews go to work detail, and some of the Jews sent to the work detail literally had to that day or the next day pull the bodies of their wives and daughters and sons out of the gas chambers and put them in the ovens. That's literally described. Horrific beyond our imagination. And what Daniel describes is there will be in the future a worse day, so we better be prepared for that. The Jew who was a Sonderkommando, there was another one named Leib Langfuss, and he's the one who recorded the story of the rabbi. It turns out it was true. The rabbi really did say the Shema with his congregation. And let me read you some of the things that Leib Langfuss wrote. On November 25th, 1944, he writes, "I would request that my various writings of the past, signed with the initials, etc., buried in jars and boxes in the courtyard of crematorium number 2. Crematorium was where they burned the bodies. Be collected, as well as the 2 larger writings, etc." So he wrote a whole bunch of documents, and most of these have never been found. And the Polish government won't allow people to go and excavate there. The ones that were found were either found immediately after the war, after the Holocaust, when the Soviets arrived and there were people who came, and I'll be honest with you, Michael, a lot of the people who found these documents were looking, they knew the Jews had been murdered there, and they were some of the local Polish population who thought, well, maybe the Jews buried some gold. And instead of finding gold, they find these diaries. And one of the questions I had is, these Jews are in concentration camps. They know they're going to be killed. Where do they get pen and paper to write? And I found out the answer. What happened is these Jews would come and they were told to bring their property with them, right? Bring as much stuff, bring all your valuables, because you're just going to a work detail, right? Everything will be fine. And then they would bring their stuff, and they would be told to undress, go in the gas chambers, told they were getting a shower and be killed. Well, then the Sonderkommando would come and collect their stuff, bring it to the processing plant, so these things could be taken back to Germany. And some of the things were smuggled out. They actually smuggled out a camera. We have 2 or 3 surviving photographs from the actual operation of Auschwitz, the burning of the bodies. And that is from some man who we don't even know his name. He's a Greek. He was known as the Greek, and he smuggled the camera from this property processing plant and took a photo of the burning of the bodies. Many of the people apparently smuggled these diaries and wrote down what was happening. So we have firsthand accounts of people who knew they were going to be killed, and this is the only thing that would survive, is this testimony for future generations. And Leib Langfuss was killed, we know, on November 26, 1944. This is his last entry. In fact, I want to show people here. They can see here on this page, on the side there is written a quick note that he added in Yiddish in his diary, and it says, "We are now going to the sauna." Sauna was the euphemism for the gas chamber. "The 170 remaining men, we are convinced that they're taking us to our death. They have selected 30 men to remain in crematorium number 4. Today is 26 November 1944, and he was right. He was taken to the gas chamber and killed, and one of those 30 surviving people who were set aside to then clean up the bodies of the Sonderkommando must have hidden his diary somewhere, and today it's been found. He wrote a series of accounts which are called the Particulars, and it's really interesting because this is a man who's highly literate. He's clearly very expressive, and by the way, these documents are written in all kinds of languages. There's one written in Greek. There's one written in. There's a bunch written in Yiddish, in Polish. There's documents written. There's even a passage written in English by a little girl who was sent to her death, and some of her writings have survived. She apparently had family in England, and she must have spent some time in England, and so she could write in English. Because most of these things I'm reading in translation, but reading it in English, it's very, very powerful. So this is a translation from the Yiddish. He writes, "End of summer 1944, a transport arrived from Slovakia." Transport means a train of Jews. "The arrivals knew without a doubt that they were being taken to their death. Nevertheless, they were calm. They undressed and entered the bunker. Bunker was the gas chamber. As they were leaving the dressing room and entered the gas chamber, a woman said, maybe a miracle will still happen to us. Imagine these people they know what's happening. Yeah. There's no question at this point. These people know they're about to be murdered in a gas chamber, and they still have the hope for a miracle. And a miracle didn't happen. She died. But that hope is so deeply rooted in the heart of every Jew who has faith that God can do anything. He's the one who split the sea, and if it is his will, he can save them from a gas chamber. And so this woman going to her death, she still has faith. And I find inspiration in this, Michael. I find knowing that what Daniel 12 described is going to happen one day, I have this hope, hope of the miracle.
Let me read that. I'll continue on.
Yeah.
And at that time, thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. He's talking about the resurrection.
The book of life and the resurrection.
That's
Read the next verse, Michael, Daniel 12:2, because that's the key verse of resurrection for most Jews.
And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to their God shall shine as the stars forever and ever and ever and ever.
And look, Michael, those 2 or 3 verses in a nutshell are the Jewish experience of experiencing incredible suffering followed by redemption. And just to point to the Holocaust, what followed the Holocaust was the rebirth of the state of Israel. And the war that led that from which Israel was born is often referred to as Israel's War of Independence. But many Jews in Israel who went through that and lived through that call it the War of Resurrection. Because they literally see the death of the Jewish people, I guess not literally, they metaphorically see the death of the Jewish people in the Holocaust. One out of 3 Jews are murdered. And then 3 years after this, the state is reborn through this war which was a war of annihilation. And that time there was a deliverance. But to me, this is a picture of the things that are to come, based on what we read in Daniel. And I think it's important for us to know what this is. And I actually gave a talk about this that I videoed. It's on my website. Like I said, it's called The Lost Scrolls of Auschwitz on nehemiaswall.com. But I presented this at a university for their Holocaust Memorial Day. And afterwards, I had dinner with the president of the university. And he said, Nehemia, you know what I took away from your talk? He said, when you squeeze the toothpaste, you see what comes out. And when the Jews were squeezed, what came out was their profound faith and love of God. Many of them died. 6 million died, 1/3 of all Jews. But in that moment, they showed their true faith when they were tested. I want to read some more of this from Leib Langfuss's diary. I think we're, in a sense, Michael, we are sharing the testimony of this man who died and honoring his memory. This man who knew he was going to be killed and did his best and shared this information so generations to come would know. Another group of Jews had arrived from Tarnov. This is in his Leib Langfuss's diaries, The Lost Scrolls of Auschwitz. One of the young people sat on a bench and asked for everyone's attention. A deathly silence prevailed. My young Jewish brothers, he called out, do not believe that they are taking you to your death. It is unthinkable that this can happen to us, that tens of thousands of innocent men will be put to death. Such cruel and shocking slaughter could never happen in this world. Those who told you those things must have had their reasons. It's a conspiracy theory. The man's in the antechamber, stripped naked, about to be marched into the gas chamber, and he's telling his fellow Jews, guys, calm down. Don't believe the crazy conspiracy theories. Those are wackos who have some agenda. That's why they're telling you the Nazis are going to kill us all. He goes on, Leib Langfuss, who knew it was going to happen. He continued to speak until he had calmed down. Only when the gas was thrown into the bunker did the preacher with the well-developed conscience awaken from his dream of innocence. The pretext that he had used to calm his brothers were shown to be mere illusion and self-deception. And Michael, as we approach these end times, and I believe they're coming, I don't know when, but I know they're coming, I believe that, we better get out of our illusion and self-deception, because there are people Oh, you've got nothing. Oh, that's just conspiracy theory. Oh, you have nothing to worry about. Everything will be fine. That's what Jeremiah talked about, the false prophets who came and they would say, shalom, shalom, there is peace, there's peace. And Jeremiah says, ve'en shalom, and there was no peace. Because people, they want to believe the feel-good message. They don't want to know and hear that bad things are going to happen. So the man literally about to be marched to his death, he was essentially he's stripped naked and he's about to be killed. He's preaching, everything's going to be fine until the gas comes in and kills him. And we know that because Le Blancfuss knew he was going to be killed and he recorded it in his diary, which was hidden in these ashes or somewhere. He goes on, end of summer 1943. And bear in mind, this is an eyewitness who day in and day out, he's pulling bodies out of the gas chamber. And when he can, he sneaks away and he writes it's interesting because he was actually a rabbi or what's called a dayan, and a rabbinical judge, and he's described by some of the others under commando in their diaries. And they describe how he would go and he would weep every night for all the Jews who were murdered and for the books that were burned. And this was a man who, we don't know how he survived. Like, how does anybody survive such tragedy? So he writes, end of summer 1943, there was a transport of Jews from Tarnov. They inquired where they were being taken. They were told they would be liquidated, meaning killed. They were already standing naked. A heavy, serious mood overtook them. They became lost in thought and whispered the vidui for the sins of the past. Michael, vidui is the Jewish prayer of confession. And I want to read you this prayer. This is a prayer that I grew up praying every year. You read it on Yom Kippur and you read it in other times of the year. It's a prayer that certainly all Orthodox Jews would know the core part of it by heart. When I was researching this, I'm like, vidui, ashamnu, bagadnu, gazalnu, dibalnu dofi. I didn't need to look it up, right? At least the main part of the prayer I remember from my childhood, even though I haven't prayed this prayer in decades. I'm a Karaite Jew now, but growing up, I remember this prayer. Let me read you what it says. We are not so arrogant and stubborn as to declare before thee that we are holy, righteous, and without sin. This is the vidui, the confession a Jew says on Yom Kippur and before he dies. Surely we have sinned, we have offended, we have betrayed, we have robbed, and we have spoken basely. Now, when we recite that list of sins, it's a long list of sins, and this is just something my experience growing up. We would say ashamnu, bagadnu, gazalnu. You beat your chest as you're doing it. Dibalnu dofi. Hevinu ve'oshanu, zadnu, chamasnu, tafalnu sheker. And it's a long list of sin. We've done these sins. We're not innocent. We're asking God to accept our confession. And of course, years later, when I read the New Testament, I read this and I'm like, yeah, I know what that is. And it was interesting. I would talk to Christians and people who are trying to live according to the way Yeshua lived, people who were returning to their Hebrew roots, and they would ask me, what does this mean? I'm like, well, what do you mean what does it mean? It's the vidui. This is part of life. You confess your sins before God. This is Luke 18, 9-14. I won't read the whole thing.
Man beating his chest and crying out.
That's right. The Pharisee standing by himself was praying thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like this tax collector, right? That's not what the Pharisee is supposed to say. Even by Pharisee standards, that man is an arrogant sinner. And the tax collector standing far off would not so much as raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. So even the Pharisees, this Pharisee in Luke is a sinning Pharisee, even the Pharisees understood that you beat your chest and you ask God for forgiveness. Now, Michael, I want to get to the key passage. This is the passage that describes the rabbi who's going to his death, and he recites the Shema, and it's in the diary of Le Blancfuss, and it's dated, Michael, Passover 1944. A transport arrived from Vittel in France, including several Jewish notables. One of them was the rabbi of Bayonne, the late Rabbi Moshe Friedman. So we know that man's name. He had been one of the great Jewish scholars of Poland, a truly rare patriarchal figure. Michael, here is his picture. This rabbi was known as Moshenu, our Moshe, our Moses. He was the leading rabbi of Eastern Europe before the Holocaust. And just to give you an idea of who we're talking about, there were thousands, tens of thousands of rabbis. This was a rabbi that any Jew in Europe would know who this rabbi was. It really is just imagine this image. In a Christian context, replace the name Moshe Friedman with Billy Graham. This is the Billy Graham of Judaism of that time. He's known to everyone as this leading figure, as this really uniting figure. He was a figure who united all the different factions of Judaism in love and as much as they could possibly get together. And there he is, stripped naked, about to be marched into a gas chamber. Rabbi Moshe undressed along with everyone else. Didn't matter who he was a Jew. He then addressed the Oberscharführer, that's the Nazi commander. Holding on to the lapel of his coat, he spoke to him in German. Do not think you will succeed in destroying the Jewish people. The Jewish people will live forever. The innocent blood you have spilled will be demanded with you. You will speak. He spoke with great emotion and great strength. Then when he had finished, he put on his hat. This is the hat showing him to be a rabbi, the rabbi hat. And in great excitement, called out, Shema Yisrael! Hear, O Israel. And all the Jews faithfully responded with him, Shema Yisrael, out of a sense of profound faith, which had surrounded them in all the last moments of their lives. It was a moment of supreme elevation. Michael, this is a Sonderkommando knowing he's going to be killed in the wee hours of the morning when no one's around. He has a stolen pen and a smuggled pad of paper, and he's writing this down so the generations to come will know what happened in those last moments. He says it was a moment of supreme elevation such as may be encountered but once in a lifetime, proving the eternal nature of Jewish spiritual resistance. Michael, when I started this investigation, I didn't know if this was a fable or if it was a true story. Michael, here is the page in the diary of Leib Langfuss that was uncovered from Auschwitz, the actual page where he describes it. And now I'm going to show here, you can see, even if you aren't fluent in Hebrew, it's actually written in Yiddish, but some of the words are Hebrew. You can see the words twice, Shema Yisrael, Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel. They're right there, Michael. You can see them in the documents. Everyone watching this can see this is a true story, that this rabbi proclaimed the Shema in the last moment. I want to tell you why, and I know we're running out of time, so I want to quickly explain to you why he did this. There was a rabbi after the war who described his experience where he was approached by another rabbi who said, I know I'm going to be killed. What blessing do I make just before I die? And he told him the blessing to make. And it's, blessed art thou, Lord, King of the universe, who sanctified us with his commandments, commanding us to love the awesome and honorable name of the one who is, and the one who was, and the one who future will be. And Michael, that is the meaning of the name Yehovah. Hayah, Hoveh, Yehiyeh, he who was, he is, who is to come, who will be. That is the name that appears in the Hebrew sources. And just really quickly, when you take those, and I have a teaching on this called The Great I Am Revealed. Don't have time to get the whole thing. But when you take those three words, Hayah, Hoveh, Yeh, he was, he is to come, he will be, you get Yehovah. Those three forms of the verb together combine the name Yehovah. Of course, you have this in the book of Revelation. I talk about that in the study. Revelation 4:8, 1:4, etc. This idea of he was, he is to come, he will be. So the last words and the breath of the dying Jew as he's being murdered, for no other reason that he's God's chosen people, for no other reason that he is a Jew in covenant with the creator of the universe, is praising the name of the one who was, is, and who will be, of that name Yehovah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we didn't get anywhere near what we were intending to do today. This is a stream of spiritual consciousness that you are participating in. And this is what it's like. When I have Nehemia over, this is what I look forward to be ministered to spiritually, and it is always a spiritual event. And now, in closing, Nehemia, if you would close with the prayer.
Michael, I want to say the prayer that these Jews in the Holocaust and going back hundreds of years, the prayer of the Jewish martyr that they prayed. This is recorded in the book of a 16th century rabbi, and it was recited in the Holocaust. And there it says, when a persecution takes place, let him say the vidui, the confession. My God and God of my fathers, I have sinned. I have offended. I have betrayed. Behold, the time has arrived for my life to be taken from me and to deliver it into your hand for the sanctification of your unique name. Shema Yisrael, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad. Amen.
Amen. Well, Shabbat Shalom. Have a good Sabbath. Shavua Tov. Have a good week. And we'll see you back here for a continuation of the story next week. You don't want to miss this.